glad you could join us on another conversation on Business Redefined. Last week we had a conversation on power tariffs, a historical perspective. This week we want to dig into tariffs and their setting, and to do this I am joined once again by engineer David Mwangi, veteran in the industry, 43 years in the East African energy space, 32 of which spent at Kenya Power. And we begin by unbundling the tariff and having a conversation on the capacity charge. Why is it such a sticky issue when it comes to power tariff renegotiation?
Whether we are talking about under the feed-in tariff or we are talking of competitively procured power plants, what goes into determining the tariff includes, for projects that can guarantee capacity, that can tell the system operator that tomorrow at this time at 11 we can overuse so many megawatts. Those are like geothermal, hydro, biomass, the thermal plants. Those can guarantee capacity. For those, the tariff includes a capacity charge based on, say, dollars, for example, dollars per kilowatt per month or per year. But since they are billing monthly, let's talk about per month. And then, and that is paid so long as that capacity is available or not. Whether is available, whether they are dispatched, as we call it, when it is asked to generate by the system controller, we talk about dispatching. Whether it's dispatched or not, the capacity, or to whatever level it's dispatched, the capacity charge has to be paid in full. Actually, that comprises the main revenue, maybe 80 to 90% of the revenue of that company. And the thing is that because it has no control over how much it is going to be generating in terms of energy, because that is a decision that the system operator will have to be making on a day-to-day, on a daily basis, hour-to-hour basis, and so on.
The capacity charge, as the name suggests, is pegged on the capacity that a generator avails in the system at any given time. Now, what happens to the generators such as wind and solar who cannot guarantee a given level of capacity?
Those are for the plants that can guarantee capacity. Wind and solar cannot. And for those, there is no capacity charge. But then you have energy charge for energy actually delivered in the metering point to the buyer. But also, they have equipment that is taking a record of how much energy was available but could not be taken, either because the KPOC didn't have enough demand or because the distribution or the transmission network was out. That's a risk that is usually taken by the buyer of power or off-taker, as KPOC is known under the PPA. And KPOC has to pay that in terms of what is called deemed generated energy. In other words, it is considered to have been generated, even if it wasn't taken. Yeah, because otherwise it would be difficult for solar and wind then to be economic, to be financially viable for the investors.
Anytime you have a conversation around the capacity charge component of a tariff, you inevitably will also have a mention of the demand. Why is this the case? And this was part of the idea behind the last mile connectivity in this country in a bid to onboard more demand into the consumption.
When we talk about the generation tariff being high, we are not talking about the millions of dollars. We are looking at the US cents per kilowatt hour or Kenya shillings per kilowatt hour. But when you are looking at Kenya shillings per kilowatt hour, what other contributors are there? Demand being lower for maybe projects not coming in time, the generation program was based on some projections of when the Vision 2030 flagship projects are going to come and how much demand they would take, and so on. And therefore, if the demand is lower than what was expected, and you have brought in the capacity, the generation capacity, then when you look at the cost per unit, which is what people are looking at, yes, to say that the tariff is high, it's going to be high. If KPOC has so many outages, they are paying for capacity charges, they are paid for deemed generated energy, but the sales are depressed because of the outages, the cost per kilowatt hour is going to be high. And you keep on complaining about the tariff. But really, it is not so much because of the values in the PPAs, but because the capacity which is being paid for is not being fully utilized because of the outages, because of new consumers that have paid for new connection but have taken months to be connected. And if they were connected earlier, they should be consuming more and more.
The other component of the electricity tariff is the energy charge. Now, this is the amount generators are paid for actually dispatching power into the grid. We sought to understand a lot more about the energy charge.
So, apart from the capacity charge in dollars per kilowatt per month, then for every kilowatt hour that is actually dispatched, that is metered as entering the KPOC system, then there is some cents, if say US cents per kilowatt hour, that is agreed on in the power purchase agreement. If it's a thermal plant, you also have the fuel cost. And the fuel cost is not based on how much liters of fuel they have bought. Actually, it's calculated based on a specific consumption number that is in the power purchase agreement. So many grams, for example, per kilowatt hour of HFO, for example. And if they had run their plant in an inefficient way, then it means they may not be recovering all the fuel that they have used. But so that incentivizes the generating company to be efficient throughout the tenure of the PPA. Power tariffs are political, and whether it's industry or other sectors of the economy, they are going to government to complain about high tariffs. And this happens everywhere. So, and you find that happening in virtually all the countries. But then also, sometimes it's a bit tricky when you compare the tariffs, because you never know that you are comparing apples with apples. Do these tariffs, you sometimes are not sure, do they have are they with the taxes, the numbers you are using in all cases? Are they cost reflective? In Kenya, we are cost reflective almost. In other countries, they are not yet there. They are moving there, but they are not yet there. So then you may be comparing with a tariff that is being cross-subsidized, is being subsidized by government. It's not cost reflective. And maybe some of the other sectors or even some taxpayers are subsidizing the electricity consumers in some of those countries. And of course that can't continue for long. There will come a time when, in any case, they are also going to look at their tariff policy. And just like our tariff policy, where we say we have three objectives, the objective one, the economic one, being that tariffs should be cost reflective. The second one being that the financial objective, that the sector must make financial returns to investors. And the third one being the social one, where then we have the lifeline tariff. That is supposed to be part of the social objective of the Kenyan tariffs. Maybe there are equivalents of those in other countries as well. But because these countries are competing in regional markets like EAC, COMESA, and now even the Africa continent one, you are going to always keep finding these arguments, because they are going to be comparing with themselves in one country from what is happening in other countries. Yeah.
We take a short break on Business Redefined. We shall be back with a lot more on this conversation on understanding electricity tariffs. Stay tuned. Welcome back to this conversation on Business Redefined, where we are in the quest to understand electricity tariffs, how they are structured and which factors come into play. We begin part two by asking, how does inflation, the consistent rise in the prices of goods and commodities, impact power tariffs?
Some portion of the capacity charge, in the PPA it's agreed what portion of the capacity charge is going to be scalable in order to take care of inflation. And because these prices are in dollars or euro for the case of Electricana, the escalation is according to the CPI of that currency. And it is defined in the PPA. The basic value is also agreed on, and the actual CPI that will be followed is also laid out.
Now, how does the transmission and distribution infrastructure and the subject of technical losses impact the tariffs that the end consumer has to bear when it comes to the consumption of electricity? Let's get more on this.
We are doing a lot of electrification at medium voltage, and yet KETRACO has plans for transmission lines that are supposed to provide the high voltage backbone for the distribution network. And those lines are not done for various reasons. So obviously then you have, and that also explains why technical losses may be higher than they should be. You may remember that until very recently, there used to be issues in Western Kenya. Yes. Until a line was built from Lesos to Kibos, and then Kibos to Kisumu, at higher voltage, 220 kV to Kibos and 132 kV to Kisumu. And that removed the constraints that were there in the network. Yeah. And now customers could fully load their equipment. I used to hear some large power consumers couldn't fully load their equipment, so they would have to bring in their standby generators. So if we were to remove some of these obstacles in the way that the demand is grown, and the way that the system, the distribution network, the transmission is brought on board and strengthened when it requires to be strengthened, and operated to minimize the outages for whatever reason the outages are coming, then we may not be complaining much about the tariff. The technical losses are going to require investment in the transmission network. KETRACO is behind schedule in bringing in a lot of lines, and partly because of, I think not partly, but largely because of the resources for building the lines not being available. So that will take time, and it is also more costly. But reducing the commercial losses, that's something that KPOC can actually do much more easily by being stricter with the the checking of their meters. If need be, they can even get government support where, in some of the in places like Madare and Kibera, where people come and connect and even submitter, you have somebody who is selling power to the other people. Sometimes maybe the government ought to step in and help Kenya Power, because it's also a risky business for Kenya Power. But still, it can be more easily achieved than reducing the technical losses.
So what's the future of the energy sector in Kenya? The Energy Act of 2019 introduced a raft of reforms, one of which is the provision for open access, which would allow generators to move directly from generating to their end consumers, bypassing the distributor, that's Kenya Power. What would this mean for the industry, and what would this mean in particular for tariffs?
One, of course, is to liberalize virtually all the segments of the power supply chain. Not just the generation, which has been open now for some years, but transmission, where we see we are even bringing in private sector in owning the transmission network, but also in distribution. And distribution itself in Kenya is starting with the mini grids, that in the past the mini grids were owned by the government or through REREC. But now you have a number of private sector mini grids that are already operating. And now that we are soon going to be having the mini grids regulations, we are going to see more of that. But these are in places that are not less than 15 kilometers away from the grid. That is what the regulations are saying. Don't bring your mini grid anywhere closer than 15 kilometers from the main grid. And then, of course, the regulations say what will happen when the grid actually adds going there. Because while you are telling the mini grid not to come close to the grid, you don't have such restriction on the grid operator. If they find that it's getting commercially viable to go towards those consumers, they may do that. And the regulations are saying what are the options that the grid operator has. But liberalizing then also means what I was saying, that you can have, of course, it's never intended to duplicate actual lines. In one area, you don't want KPOC to own some lines and you have another person owning the others. No, you don't want to do that, especially where you can reach the same consumers and buy the same consumers who are buying power from KPOC can buy from another seller, whether that seller is a generating company or is somebody who is buying from a generating company and then transmitting through Ketraco or KPOC lines and the KPOC distribution network. What will happen is that they can even use the metering system of KPOC with agreement on how they are going to be paying for doing that. But then for use of the KPOC network, the distribution one, what is proposed is to have a use of system charge that the regulator will have to define. And the regulator will also have to define for the transmission network a wheeling charge that a player who is selling power to end-use consumers and taking it through these lines that are owned by other entities, we will have to pay those entities for the use of that infrastructure. So that's what will happen. And the other thing is also net metering. Net metering is a situation where even you in your, even Nairobi or wherever your home district is, you can have rooftop solar, PV. You can size it so that you have surplus. So during the day, you are supplying your house from the solar, and you have some surplus, and you are connected to the grid, because you have been connected anyway earlier. You sell that surplus to Kenya Power. There is a meter that is going to be metering both ways, from you to them and from them to you. And at the end of the month, you do the netting, which is why it's called net metering. And you see, where is the net flow? Is it from KPOC to you or from you to KPOC? And if it is from you to KPOC, of course, you pay KPOC. Or if it is from KPOC to you, you pay them the normal charge they have been charging you, depending on your customer category. If it is from you to them, they pay you, but not at the rate at which they charge you. The recommendation of the feasibility study that had been done on net metering was that they should pay you at around 60% of what you pay them, mainly because they are supplying you at night, and supply at night is more costly because that's when sometimes even the thermal power plant has been switched on to meet the power demand, which is highest between 6:30 and 10:30 or 11 p.m.
Regional power pools, could they be part of the solution in the conversation around scaling down power tariffs in this country? And now that the East African power pool has been in operation for years, how is it that we haven't been able to optimize its full capacity?
That is something that we should have. In fact, it's a pity we are still not there, mainly because the infrastructure itself has taken much longer to build. But I believe now the Ethiopia-Kenya interconnector is almost ready, and it should be in a position to be commissioned soon. Initially, when that was conceived, Kenya was thinking more about getting power from Ethiopia, mainly because Ethiopia have a large source of hydro power that is much lower cost than our hydros here, and because they have a lot of potential, then they can sell to a lot of other African countries. But sometimes again, when you are looking at what Ethiopia is going to sell power to in Kenya, it may not be as very close to their cost as we may think. Because usually when one country is selling to another, it's not just looking at what it costs them to generate. It also looks at what the other country would be using if they were not getting that power from them. And usually the selling price is going to be somewhere in between the avoided cost by the buyer and the generation cost by the supplier. So there are all those local and regional politics about tariffs. And it happens even in other continents.
And that takes us to the close of our conversation on Business Redefined, where we have been unbundling power tariffs in this country and looking into the factors informing how they are structured. Remember, this was the fourth in a four-part series delving into the issue of energy sector reforms. Nonetheless, we shall continue shining the spotlight on these issues, so stay tuned to Business Redefined.